my responsibility is to take this and say, you know what? I could go through the years that I did. And she said she did go through years of doing self-destructive behaviors, of blaming herself, of complaining to herself. And then she said, you know what? I'm going to own this. I'm going to take responsibility that this did happen, but I'm going to go ahead and live a great life.
Welcome to Champions Mojo Weekly Podcast, where your hosts Kelly Pallas and Maria Parker share with you what it takes to be a champion. Kelly is a former Division I head swim coach, Olympic trials qualifier, and holds Masters World and National swimming records. And Maria holds world records in endurance cycling and was the overall women's winner of the world's toughest bike race, Race Across America. They'll be sharing their personal stories and wisdom, along with interviewing other champions to give you the tools you need for becoming a true champion in your own life. And now, your host, Kelly Pallas.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Champions Mojo Podcast. What does the word responsibility mean to you? The topic of responsibility is important if you want to win in sports or life. Maria and I agree this is an underrated topic, so we wanted to talk about it today and give you some key points that you will be able to get real value from. So let's get started by saying hello to my co-host, Maria Parker. Hello, Maria.
Hi, Kelly. It's great to be with you today and discussing an interesting and valuable topic like responsibility. So let's start off with the Merriam-Webster various definitions that center around having a duty, being accountable, and making decisions without another's authority. While these are broad definitions from the dictionary, I like to think of responsibility as ownership. What do you think, Kelly?
Yes, Maria. I like those broad definitions, but I especially like the term ownership. In fact, in a great book by Jocko Willenick and Leif Babin, they use that term, and their book is called Extreme Ownership: How Navy SEALs Lead and Win. And I'm a big fan of the Jocko podcast, believe it or not. He does an awesome podcast. His podcast sometimes lasts 3 hours long, but
yes.
My husband, Mark, loves Jocko. You know, Mark's a Marine or former Marine. I guess there's no former Marines, but he is a Marine veteran, and he loves these Navy SEALs talking. So I know Jocko talks about ownership a lot, and I think that has a ton in common with responsibility. But nothing I enjoy more than hearing stories of your great life, Maria, and what you've done, because we do interview a lot of champions, but right here in my midst, I have my great sister-in-law with your stories. Do you have something that you've really had to own up and be responsible for?
Well, yeah. We've talked about before taking responsibility in terms of athletic performance for your preparation, and that when you don't do well, you know, you can look to yourself for what you could have done better. But I've been thinking about this a lot this week as well, because I have also been listening to a book by a former or Navy SEAL, David Goggins.
Oh, yeah.
He's an incredibly tough human, and this isn't necessarily the takeaway from his book, but one of the things he talks a lot about is the stories you're telling yourself. You know, the stories we tell ourselves are what it's all about. It's our mindset. And so, and this is just a silly little story, but this week I have been working really hard on changing, I'm moving and now I'm changing banks, and that's a big deal. And the little whiny voice in my head has been blaming everyone and everything for my banking troubles. I blame my old bank. I blame, my husband. I've just been blaming and complaining and whining in my head about doing this job of changing banks. It doesn't even sound that bad when I talk about it, but our finances are complicated, and there's, as you know, lots of money automatically going in and going out, and I had to make a decision on a bank, and then I had to do it. And what I found was I was just constantly complaining about it, both to anybody who would listen, which weren't too many people because it's a boring subject, but also it just in my head, it's like, I don't want to do this. And then I was listening to the David Goggins book, and I thought, Maria, you have got to stop complaining and take responsibility. This is the bank you were in. This was the choice you made. You've chosen to move to a new bank. Just do it. And sort of externally, just recognizing the whininess and the victim mentality in my head. It's not and I can do that about things all day long. It's like, the laundry, the dog is bringing in all this dirt in the house, and I gotta, I'm blaming my dog. I'm blaming everyone and everything, the washing machine, for the little discomforts of life, and that is not helpful, and it does not get you where you want to go. I've been inspired to just listen to those complaining and victim voices in my head, and just to stop being that whiny, complainy victim, and to start just going forward and said, yeah, it's hard. Yeah, I got to do it. Yeah, it's not fair, but I'm going to do it. So not an epic example, but there's lots of things in life where things didn't go well and I had to take responsibility for it. But I realized that this is a constant theme in my life, in the voices in my head. So, Kelly, I know you have thought about this too. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, Maria, first, your example, I don't think, as a fellow person that has, we have several different bank accounts, and I think many of us these days do have different bank accounts. If you're doing what we call a side hustle, you've got you got your main job, your main bank account, and then you've got your, maybe if you're an entrepreneur, you've got a separate bank account for that, and some spouses even have his and her bank accounts. But so just to give you a little, not to let you be a victim, but when I told Mark that you guys were changing banks and that it was he's like, oh my gosh, if we had to change banks, it would just be D-Day. So yes, that would be,
you're letting me off the hook.
It would be a horror, but I know you, and, it isn't like you to complain. And so I love the topic of responsibility. And I want to say that it can come in so many forms. I mean, I think at the basic, most simplest is what you said, that I'm going to take responsibility for my performance. I'm going to take responsibility for my physique, my body, my fitness level. Have I done the work? Have I eaten right? But when you get into some of the more ambiguous things that happen to us in life that really can, knock you down. So for example, if I don't train enough and I go to a swim meet and I perform badly, I definitely take responsibility for that. But that's kind of an easy thing to take responsibility for, because I did that. But one of the things in my research for this show, I was so moved to I watched a TED Talk on responsibility by a woman named Joelle Castick. And she talks about how horrifically she was sexually abused by her choir leader. She was in a choir, and this choir leader groomed her and had sex with her when she was a very young girl, obviously a minor. She ended up being pregnant with a sexually transmitted disease.
Oh my gosh.
And then when she got too old for him, because he was a pedophile, he dumped her. It was just a horrific story that she tells. But one of the things that so moved me was she said, but I take responsibility for this. She said, not for his actions, but for owning that this was my life. Owning that this happened to me and that I can choose how I respond to it. So just like you said,
that's
David
beautiful.
Goggins, so her responsibility, she says, my responsibility is to take this and say, you know what? I could go through the years that I did. And she said she did go through years of doing self-destructive behaviors, of blaming herself, of complaining to herself. And then she said, you know what? I'm going to own this. I'm going to take responsibility that this did happen, but I'm going to go ahead and live a great life. And so I think that kind of responsibility to me is like the highest level of responsibility.
Yes.
And my, for me, it's, I'm going to be brief about it because people know that I went through red skin syndrome, but it is an important charity. It affects many people. I mean, if you're listening out there and you're like, oh no, we're talking about red skin syndrome again, it can happen to anyone who uses over-the-counter medications like hydrocortisone. The red tube that's in your medicine cabinet can give you red skin syndrome, which I would not wish on my worst enemy. But it happens to people who have eczema. So so all those years that I was using topical steroids, I should have. I'm not shooting on myself, and I love the term "don't shoot on yourself," but I could have researched that you're not supposed to use topical steroids for more than 2 weeks. And I used them for decades, even though my doctors were saying they're safe enough to put on a baby. You can use them for decades. I trusted my doctors. So out of getting red skin syndrome and taking months to years to fully recover from it and having it take away many, many joyful parts of my life, I was a victim. I acted like a victim. I blamed the doctors. I blamed the pharmaceutical companies for not more clearly labeling them. But I am taking responsibility. I have taken responsibility that this was just something that happened to me, and I can make a choice like Joelle did in her, her sexual assault, which that's not even remotely close to what she went through. But so that's my take on responsibility, is to not be a victim, to not blame. So whatever happens to you, you can take responsibility no matter how tragic or horrific it is. And I think the responsibility is in the story that you tell yourself. What do you think of that, Maria?
Yeah, I love that, because we're not saying it was okay for the doctors to prescribe. I know you used to do those like soak and slathers with. Yes. I mean, we're not saying that was okay. Doctors should have known better, shouldn't have prescribed that. But what we are saying is that this is what these experiences made you who you are today. You can say, oh, I've got red skin or whatever, but I don't have the beautiful skin that I once had, or I'm afraid to go out in public. But you can also say these experiences that I had, good and bad, and that were sometimes other people hurting you, created the person that I am today. And with that comes some good and some bad. But if you take, as you said, if you say this is where I am, and I'm going to stop blaming my parents, my coach, my whatever. I mean, so many. I remember going through a period after I graduated from college, just looking at my childhood and seeing and being critical of my parents' parenting of me and blaming them for some of the weaknesses that I had. And at some point I just realized, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. I got to own who I am. Of course they weren't perfect, but they were pretty daggone good. And this is who I am. So I love the term ownership as a synonym for responsibility, because we can own who we are. We can own that a bad thing happened. We can acknowledge that somebody hurt us. And I think this is really helpful in relationships too. And I know you can relate to this, in marriages and relationships with people you're very close to. If you have disagreements or difficulties, my first instinct is to blame. If he's in such a bad mood and he said that, and that's not helpful at all. I mean, I can't change him. I can't, but I can take responsibility for how I got us there and my response to what he, is doing, or what the person that I might be having a conflict with is doing. So I love ownership. It's beautiful.
Ownership is key on all of that. Just owning yourself, authenticity, and owning it. Researching this a little further, there are many, many ways to become responsible. So there are the habits, like there are habits of responsible people. There are I would say like the top 5 things that I think help people be responsible is stop making excuses for yourself is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Owning up to it.
Stop blaming others.
Yeah, stop blaming others. And a great one is to stop complaining. When you complain, it just...
Yeah, and the way we do this, I mean, it's called cognitive behavioral therapy. And
Yes.
it's you think about your thoughts, like what your feelings come from your thoughts. And so if you're feeling sad or mad or some feeling that maybe you don't want to have, you can say to yourself, what thought am I having? And it often is a thought of a complaining thought, like me. I was really unhappy about this bank change, and I realized I was constantly whining in my head if I wasn't whining out loud, which I was doing plenty of that too. So it's capturing your thoughts and asking yourself what is the root of this thought. I'm hurt. Like, for instance, if my sister has been in several bad car accidents that were not her fault at all. I mean, she was hit from behind. I loved how she dealt with it because she didn't whine to herself, even though, I mean, it really put her in a financial bind, and she had to have new cars and of course, there's always an uninsured driver. But she didn't whine about it. She just said, there's nothing I can do about that. And whining doesn't make it better. She captured her thought, which was, woe is me. This is going to put me back. And she just realized it wasn't helpful. And so, she turned it around and said, oh, I get a new car. Okay. I'm going to have a bigger loan now, but at least I get a new car and I can get the car I really want. So she's really good at that. And I know many people who just seem to have really, really bad luck, and a lot of who they become from that is dependent upon what they say to themselves about what happened to them. And if you can take ownership for at least your response, if not for what happened. And that's what really Joelle was talking about. She's talking about taking ownership of her response to something really bad that happened to her.
Yes. And that second pillar of these 5 top things that we came up with is don't complain. So I think that's so true. And in those people, and fortunately I don't feel like I'm one of them, but if I look back at my life, I might say, you know what, I've had a lot of really bad things happen to me, but I never consider myself one of those people that has had bad things happen to them, because I think in general I've taken ownership and, okay, that's what happened. But I think if you don't take ownership and you continue to complain, then you're a complainer, and then you stack. Then you're a stacker, and then you are all of a sudden one of those.
Stacker.
Yeah, you're a stacker.
I could be a stacker.
You're one of those people that bad things happen to. So instead of, like, if those people who stack bad things that happen to them, and these people, the person that remembers, they have the memory of an elephant with anything bad that's ever happened to them. And a lot of times Mark will say to me, do you remember when that awful thing happened? And I'll be like, I don't remember that. Or he'll say, do you remember that terrible fight we had? And I'll be like, no, I don't remember that. But, and Mark's not a stacker, and he doesn't remember, like, in counseling with relationships, they call it the actual, I don't like to say the S word, but it's the doo-doo bag. So it's like you reach into the doo-doo bag and you pull something out that, your spouse or your partner did that really irritated you, and you don't forget it. But I think that's part of ownership. If you don't complain all the time about something, then maybe you don't end up being one of those people that is constantly hit by bad stuff. Because I believe we're all hit by bad stuff frequently. And it's the story that you tell yourself, and you just move on, and it just becomes like a small little thing instead of, it's not making a molehill into a mountain.
Yeah. I think that's right. But I think it's also a lot like, everything is like working out, right, Kelly? Everything in my life I can compare to working out.
Exercise.
But I think you can develop a habit, and I have at times in my life been a complainer, been a victim. And I have found myself going down that road where I am reminding myself and rehearsing the bad thing that happened to me here, or the bad thing that somebody said to me there, or it's just a bad habit. And like exercise, I can make a new habit of saying, no, I'm not gonna go there. I'm taking ownership for at least my responsibility to the thing, to my reaction to the things that happened to me. And that I really did find myself this week, just like, just nonstop. It wasn't just the bank change. There's several other, we moved to a place where there's just a lot more paperwork, for better or for worse. And so if you're not used to, like, you go into a race expecting a certain thing, and then like it actually has 10,000 more feet of climbing than you expected.
Yeah.
So part of it is, and I think I would add this to taking responsibility, is being aware of the difficulties that are in front of you. And if things go worse than you expect, not taking the victim role. Oh my God, this is so much harder than I thought it was going to be, yada, yada, yada. Just say, no, I don't have to complain. This is what it is.
Yes. So we've spent a lot of time on that, but I think that's a huge one, which is, just to reiterate these. Number one, stop making excuses or blaming. That's number one. Stop complaining, which we've just covered quite nicely.
Right. Ad nauseum.
Yeah, ad nauseum, but I think it's a good one to cover. Number three is manage your actual duties. So if you take responsibility for, and your finances, your emotions, your physical fitness, your relationships, it's managing those in a way that you feel like you have ownership. It's like, if those are your chores that you're supposed to do around the house, then you own them. If it's finances that you manage, then you own those. So really managing your things. And it's funny because this ties into what we just talked about on our last podcast before the David Marsh podcast, was time management. And one of the big parameters that I found in my research on responsibility was keeping a schedule. So keeping a schedule is number 4 of the 5, which is, if you are keeping a schedule, then you're holding yourself accountable. You're taking ownership of your time. So if if you've got a whole bunch of tasks to do and you put them on your schedule. So I think that one, again, not super exciting, but very, very important. And the last one I love, and it's not often talked about, but of these 5 is avoid procrastination.
Oh, yeah.
That one, we might do a whole show on procrastination.
Yeah, let's procrastinate on it. Let's not do it just yet.
Because I think you can procrastinate on responsibility 101, which is just, am I going to do my workout today? And you put it off. Or you can procrastinate on responsibility PhD, which is, am I going to own this really horrible thing that happened in my life, and how am I going to react to it, or am I going to keep being a victim? So I think that one, for me, procrastination is really powerful. What do you think on that one, Maria?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I would want to interject here that if you've had something really awful happen to you, one way to work through it would be to talk to somebody professional, about it. We're not suggesting that you should just pull up your big girl panties and go on if something awful has happened. Sometimes really talking it through is the best thing you can do. But I think all of these, I'm really aware of what you're talking about as being an adult. And so now I'm living next door to my grandchildren, who are 1, 3, and 4. And they're doing, they're refusing to take responsibility every day. They whine, they complain, one hurts the other. And so, and it's been really inspirational to me, because the voices in my head are like my 3-year-old grandson's voice. I want this. I don't, he hurt me. She hurt me. I'm hungry. I want the rainbow ball. It's like,
I want the rainbow ball.
I want the rainbow ball. But you can't have the rainbow ball right now. It's time for a nap. So, for me, it's very aspirational and inspirational to not behave like a 3 or 4-year-old, to say, okay, I'm going to be an adult about this. And so, yeah, the not complaining, not blaming, not procrastinating, those are all just being grown up, being a mature person. And I'm not saying you should do that. I'm saying I need to do this. And if I think of myself as my whiny 3-year-old grandson, then it's much easier for me to say, oh, just stop, Maria. Don't act like a child.
That's a great perspective, Maria. I really, really like that. And, it is, sometimes hard to grow up. It doesn't matter what age you're at. You can snap into those old habits of being a child. But I love that. And I think, responsibility, like I said at the top of the show, it's underrated. It's something that when you think a little more deeply about it, I think it can really help you or help me, help you, help anyone listening. And so before we go to our takeaways, like something that you're really going to take away and get an action item on, what would you have any other thoughts, Maria, on connecting, responsibility?
I think just to reiterate what I said, that we can take responsibility once we've actually acknowledged and dealt with any injury that might have been done to us. And so, we're not suggesting you ignore that. If something, Kelly, I think you can take responsibility for your skin, because we've already said this was a bad thing that happened, but I am, here I am, and this is my life. So, and I am who I am. So I would reiterate that everyone should become an adult, but sometimes you need a little help along the way, and need to talk to others about what you may have been through.
Absolutely. And I've spent many hours on a counselor's couch talking about my skin and literally how to deal with it. So I'm a big proponent of counseling for almost anything. I just think if you can get in there and talk to someone, or even, a best friend.
Yeah. And if you don't want to get a counselor, get a coach. It's just so great to have somebody who doesn't have a dog in your fight, who can listen to you and encourage you.
So wonderful. So I'm going to summarize. So number 1, stop making excuses and blaming. Stop complaining. Manage your duties, whatever those are. Just manage them well. Number 4, schedule it. Like, if it's really, be consistent with your schedule helps with responsibility. And number 5, avoid procrastinating. So I think all those are really great tools to be more responsible. And my action item out of here, I think it's going to be avoid procrastination. I can be a procrastinator, and I'm going to just realize that that's part of just stepping up to the plate, owning what I need to do, and getting it done as quick as I can. How about you, Maria?
I like that. I think I'm going to have a visual. I'm going to keep a visual of my grandchildren and tell myself, like, that is not you. So when those, I certainly don't do it out loud. I've learned well enough not to kick my feet and scream. But I think I'm going to, when I start to have those thoughts that make me feel like a victim or unhappy, I'm going to remind myself that I am not a 3-year-old, as cute as my beautiful grandson is. I'm not 3. I'm an adult, and I can take responsibility for my thoughts, and I can make them, I can turn them around so that I own what I do.
So no complaining and whining that you want the rainbow ball.
No, the rainbow football is going to have to stay out of reach for a while.
I love it. Well, awesome. Well, that is our show on responsibility. We so appreciate you listening. And if you're enjoying the show, we ask you to go to our website, championsmojo.com, where we've got every episode. This episode is number 30, Maria. Can you believe it?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's 30 weeks. That's
30
terrific.
weeks. So there's all our shows are there. You can email us if you have another idea on what you think responsibility means. We'd love to hear it from you. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Maria. Thanks for being on this journey with me, and really appreciate it.
Well, Kelly, I admire and love you so much, and I'm just delighted to be doing this, and hope you, our listeners, are enjoying this as much as we are.
Yes. All right, Maria. Love you too. Talk to you next week.
All right, love you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This week's quote of the week comes to us from former President Barack Obama. Being responsible is an enormous privilege. It's what marks anyone a fully grown human.
We are so grateful that you spent this time with us today, and we hope that you heard something that inspired, motivated, and educated you. Please see below for our copy of the show notes for any links or important information referenced here. Signing off for myself and champion co-host Kelly Pallas, we hope you'll join us again soon, and we know you can be a champion. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Champions Mojo podcast, designed to make you feel inspired, motivated, and educated. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. Also visit championsmojo.com to learn more.